Welcome to a place where lies don't hide forever, where every whispered secret finds the light, and every betrayal is met with a reckoning. Here, we pull apart the perfect picture to reveal the cracks beneath. You'll witness lives built on vows and illusions shatter in a single moment. You'll hear the phone calls that split reality in two, uncover hidden lives just miles away, and watch the silent, methodical destruction of comfort, wealth, and pride. You'll sit at the table where two worlds collide and feel the slow burn as power turns to dust and respect to shame. These are not just stories. They are the unraveling of control, the exposure of everything once thought untouchable. If you think the truth can stay buried, you're about to see how wrong that is. Stay, listen, and feel every twist as justice takes its time. The wedding day had been spoken of for years afterward, as if it were some fairy tale made real. Faces glowed with joy, the air smelled of roses and champagne, and promises hung thick in the air, heavy with meaning, the kind of vows that aren't just spoken, but sworn deep in the bones, the kind that are meant to stand against the storms of life. In front of family, in front of God, a future was sealed that day. Every look, every clasp of the hand, was a public declaration that loyalty would be the ground beneath every step taken together. Days turned into years, and life built itself around those vows. The first home bought together carried the smell of fresh paint and dreams. Each room held laughter, arguments, and the quiet comfort of shared nights. There were lean times when money was tight and the world seemed ready to break the spirit, but standing side by side made even the worst storms seem survivable. There were celebrations too, birthdays, anniversaries, holidays where the house filled with the smell of cooked meals and the sound of family gathered close. It all felt real, solid, unshakable. Trust, that invisible thread binding everything, was woven into every moment. It was in the way eyes met across a crowded room, in the sound of footsteps coming home at night, in the gentle touch on the shoulder during moments of doubt. That trust was the foundation beneath the marriage, a fortress that seemed impenetrable. Or so it appeared. There were small things, of course, that might have seemed odd to an outsider, business trips that came suddenly, phone calls taken in another room, the occasional faraway look, as if thoughts had wandered somewhere unreachable. But such things are easy to dismiss when there's no reason to believe otherwise. Love has a way of explaining away the shadows. Friends would sometimes speak in admiration of the marriage. How rare it was to see two people so committed after so many years. The kind of relationship others used as a standard, and there was pride in that, in knowing the vows had not been empty, or at least in believing so, because when trust is complete, suspicion doesn't even take root. It's simply not needed. It's strange how the human heart can live in a carefully crafted picture without seeing the cracks forming beneath the paint. How it can believe in the permanence of something that is already in the process of being dismantled. Because every shared meal, every loving glance, every late night conversation, all of it rested on a truth that was never told. While the years rolled on, another life was being lived in parallel, one that would never be mentioned in the home that was supposedly shared in complete honesty. The vows that were once spoken so clearly were already fading in someone else's memory, replaced by words whispered in other ears, in other rooms, under another roof. And yet, in the home built on those vows, nothing seemed out of place. That's the danger of illusions. They can be so convincing that even the person standing in the center of them can't tell where reality ends and lies begin. Decades of shared history can look unbreakable from the outside, but in truth, they can be nothing more than a carefully balanced deception, one that waits, silent and patient, for the moment it all finally comes apart. Some stories end slowly, fading over time until nothing is left but silence. Others wait until they can collapse in a single, shattering moment. This one was already counting down. The house was wrapped in silence, the kind that settles deep after midnight. The clock ticked steadily in the background, each sound marking another moment in what had been an ordinary night. Sleep hovered close, the kind that pulls the body toward rest, when the sudden shrill of the phone sliced through the stillness. The sound seemed louder than it should have been, urgent, almost invasive. The number was unfamiliar, the digits lit up in pale blue against the dark. Answering felt instinctive, not cautious, as if it could be some late-night emergency from a friend or family member. The voice on the other end trembled, hesitant at first, almost unsure. It asked for him. The name was spoken clearly, without question, as though the caller knew him intimately. When the words came, "Who is this?" there was a pause. A pause long enough to feel like the air itself had thickened. Then a laugh, not a warm laugh, not the polite kind strangers exchanged to mask discomfort, but the sharp, knowing sound of someone holding a truth they believed impossible to ignore. It was the kind of laugh that carried history, familiarity, and a trace of something bitter. The next words felt like a slow, deliberate wound. 15 years. 15 years of a life built with him somewhere else. 15 years of shared memories, of milestones celebrated, of children. His children. The voice didn't hesitate in saying it. The pride in the tone made it clear. This wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact, offered without shame. Images flooded in all at once, uninvited. Him sitting at the table, smiling over dinner. Him leaving with a suitcase for those business trips that seemed to come without warning. Him standing in the doorway, promising to be back soon. The pieces began to shift in the mind, rearranging themselves into something that made a twisted kind of sense. Every late call, every moment that didn't quite fit, every excuse that never seemed worth questioning, they weren't small quirks anymore. They were fractures in the foundation that had been ignored for far too long. The voice on the phone spoke more, each detail pushing deeper into the space where trust once lived. Birthdays celebrated without mention. Weekends spent away that were never what they seemed. A second home just miles away, filled with faces that bore his smile. Faces that had no idea another version of him existed elsewhere. There was no screaming, no gasp of disbelief. Only the steady, almost icy stillness of realization settling in. The truth was clear, and with it came a cold clarity. This wasn't the kind of betrayal that happened overnight. This had been built over years, carefully and deliberately, hidden in plain sight. The call ended without ceremony. No dramatic goodbye, no shouting match. Just a click, and then the weight of silence pressing in once more. The phone rested heavy in the hand, but heavier still was the knowledge that life had just split down the middle. There was before this moment, and there was after. It's strange how quickly the familiar can turn foreign. The same walls, the same furniture, the same quiet house, yet everything looked different, like the colors had drained away. Even the air felt altered, heavier, carrying the taste of something bitter and unshakable. Sleep never returned that night. Instead, the hours stretched on in a cold kind of wakefulness, the mind replaying every conversation, every moment, every seemingly innocent gesture that now felt like part of a long, deliberate performance. There was no room for tears, not yet, only a growing certainty that the truth could never be undone, and that the person who had once been trusted beyond question was a stranger wearing a familiar face. Some betrayals cut deep enough to wound the soul. This one carved it clean in two. The truth was not a shadowy affair hidden in hotel rooms or fleeting encounters with strangers. It was something far deeper, more anchored, and infinitely more cruel. It was a life, another life, built with care and intention, just miles away from the home that had always been believed to be the center of his world. The details came slowly at first, like drops of water falling into an already full glass. A birthday celebrated just last weekend, but not here. A child's drawing pinned to a refrigerator that wasn't in this house. Smiling photographs in frames, the kind that show arms wrapped tightly around each other, the kind that speak of years of belonging. The children had his eyes, his smile, his blood. There was no mistaking it. 15 years, that's how long it had been going on. Not a passing mistake, not a moment of weakness, but an entire life quietly running parallel to this one. 15 years of school runs, parent, teacher meetings, scraped knees, and bedtime stories. 15 years of birthdays with candles blown out in another dining room, of Christmas mornings with wrapping paper strewn across a different living room floor. 15 years of love, real or not, that had nothing to do with the home everyone believed was whole. It was impossible not to think of all the times his absence had been excused. Business trips, emergencies. A friend in trouble. There had been no reason to doubt those explanations back then. Trust had been complete. But now, looking back, each excuse fit perfectly into a timeline of deceit. Every weekend away, every late night return, every call taken in a low voice. It all belonged to them, not here. There was something cruel in the proximity of it. This wasn't a secret life in another city or across the country. It was here, so close that the same air carried both homes. It was possible, no, likely, that the paths of these two lives had crossed without knowing it, standing in the same grocery store, perhaps, or passing by in traffic. So close, yet separated by an invisible wall of lies. The realization came with an odd mix of rage and hollow stillness. Rage at the audacity of it, at the way two lives had been balanced so delicately, each fed just enough attention to keep suspicion away, and stillness in knowing that the life that had been believed to be unshakable was nothing more than half of a larger, crueler reality. Memories began to feel counterfeit. The vacations that seemed rushed, the way his phone was never far from his hand, the sudden need to leave during family gatherings, all of it had been moments stolen from somewhere else. He hadn't just been keeping a secret, he had been living a lie so completely that it had shape, depth, and its own heartbeat. The cruelest part wasn't just that there was another family, it was that they, too, likely believed they were his only one. They likely felt safe in the belief that his love, his time, his life belonged fully to them. It wasn't just one home that had been built on deception. It was two sets of lives stitched together by the same thread of betrayal, each kept ignorant of the other's existence. 15 years of double anniversaries, 2 Christmas mornings, 2 kitchens where his coffee sat steaming, 2 sets of arms waiting for him to return. When the full weight of it settled in, there was no scream, no outburst. Only a quiet, calculated silence, because some truths are too large to be met with immediate fury. They require time to sink in, to settle deep enough that every step taken afterward is deliberate. This wasn't the kind of wound that could be healed. It was the kind that demanded an answer, one that would leave its own mark just as deep, and the answer was already forming. The discovery didn't spark screaming matches or tear-stained confrontations. There was no dramatic scene played out in the middle of the night. Instead, there was quiet, cold, deliberate quiet, the kind of silence that holds more weight than rage ever could. Rage burns too hot, too fast. Silence, though, is patient. It waits, it calculates, it builds. Every move had to be precise. Nothing could hint at what was known. The days that followed looked no different on the surface: shared meals, polite conversations, even the occasional smile. But each moment was layered with intention. Each word was chosen carefully, each gesture masking the reality that his world was already beginning to come apart. The first step was simple information. Every bank account, every asset, every financial thread that connected his name to anything of value was traced. Passwords were quietly discovered. Statements were carefully read in the privacy of empty rooms. The map of his financial security unfolded piece by piece, and once it was clear, the dismantling began. Accounts were drained in small, unnoticeable amounts at first, then in larger, calculated withdrawals routed in ways he wouldn't see until it was too late. Investments were sold under his own signature, signatures he'd carelessly left on documents that could be copied. The prized car he loved more than most people was sold while he was away, the paperwork handled in his absence. His comfort began to erode before he even noticed it was happening. Subscriptions he valued were canceled. Bills went unpaid under the guise of oversight. His access to certain accounts mysteriously stopped working. Little inconveniences at first, small enough to ignore, until they began to pile into something he could no longer dismiss. The second step was slower, more insidious, his reputation. The same friends and family who had always spoken of him with respect were introduced to quiet truths, not the full story, but enough to plant doubt. Conversations were guided so subtly that it was never clear who had started the rumors, only that they spread quickly. Whispers grew into questions, and questions into judgment. The image he had spent decades crafting began to crack in the places that mattered most. All of it happened without a single raised voice. He came home each night to the same familiar walls, never realizing they were closing in. His smile began to fade, his tone more clipped, his patience thinner, but still he didn't know the full scope of what was unraveling. That was the beauty of it. He was losing everything without ever being given the satisfaction of a fight. Each step was deliberate. There was no need to rush. Time was an ally, and it worked quietly, stripping away the things he had taken for granted. The comfort of wealth, the safety of a spotless name, the illusion of control. Every day he woke thinking he was still the man who had everything, and every night he went to bed with just a little less. By the time the cracks had grown wide enough for him to notice, it was already too late. The accounts were empty. The car was gone. His standing with friends and family had shifted from respect to suspicion. The fortress he had believed untouchable had been dismantled brick by brick, and he had never even seen the hands taking it apart. This wasn't chaos, it was construction. The slow building of a ruin he would have no way to escape. And the final pieces had yet to fall. The table was set as if for a celebration. Candles burned low in heavy holders, their light soft against polished silverware. Plates were placed with care, glasses catching the warm flicker of flame. The air carried the scent of food made to impress. Slow, roasted meat, fresh bread, desserts arranged with precision. To anyone stepping into that room, it would have looked like a moment meant for family, for unity, for love. The first guests arrived right on time, coats draped neatly over arms, smiles worn with the ease of people stepping into a familiar home. Small talk drifted through the air, polite laughter breaking the quiet. A few minutes later, the door opened again, and more voices joined the room, different faces unfamiliar to some, but greeted with the same warmth. No one yet realized the significance of this gathering. No one but one. The seating had been planned carefully, each chair chosen for what it would reveal. He sat at the head of the table, exactly where he had always positioned himself in life, at the center, where his presence commanded the room. To his right, the family everyone knew. To his left, the family he thought could stay hidden forever. For the first few moments, the conversation was light. The clinking of cutlery against porcelain, the pouring of wine, the murmured thanks for the meal. But as plates began to empty, the space between words grew heavier. Glances passed between faces that shared features without realizing why. Questions were asked in casual tones, but the answers didn't quite fit. It didn't take long. A name slipped into the conversation, an unfamiliar one to one side of the table, a deeply familiar one to the other. Confusion spread like ripples in water. Someone asked how they knew him, and silence followed. It was the kind of silence that doesn't come from shyness, but from the sudden, dawning awareness that something is wrong. The truth wasn't shouted. It was unwrapped slowly, like a gift no one wanted. Pieces of information fell into the open, each one impossible to take back. 15 years, children, birthdays spent away from one home to be present in another, love, affection, promises, duplicated and divided between two lives that were never meant to meet. The looks on their faces were the kind that could break a person. Betrayal does that. It takes something whole and shatters it, leaving pieces too jagged to put back together. On one side of the table, disbelief and heartbreak. On the other, outrage and the sharp sting of realizing the life they thought was theirs alone had been shared. He tried to speak, but every word caught in his throat. The room had shifted. He was no longer at the head of the table. He was surrounded. Not by warmth, but by the weight of two families seeing him for exactly what he was. Every excuse, every carefully constructed lie lay bare before them. No one touched the food after that. The candles burned lower, their light dimming as the air filled with the sound of quiet, measured voices delivering truths that cut deeper than any scream could. And he sat there, forced to listen, to look into the eyes of the people he had deceived for over a decade. By the time the night ended, there was no need for raised voices or slammed doors. The damage was complete. Two families walked away from that table forever changed, their lives split by a truth that could never be forgotten. And he was left sitting in the empty room, staring at the remains of a meal that had marked the end of his carefully built world. It didn't happen all at once. There was no single, shattering moment where everything he valued was ripped away. That would have been too easy. This was slower, measured, a dismantling so gradual that at first he didn't even realize it was happening. The man who once held every card began to lose them one by one until his hands were empty. It started with the smallest of shifts. Invitations that used to come without question began to dwindle. Friends grew distant, their conversations shorter, their eyes holding questions they didn't ask aloud. Business contacts, once eager to take his calls, suddenly became harder to reach. Doors that had always opened effortlessly now required knocking, and sometimes no one answered. At first, he brushed it off. People get busy, friendships fade, work slows down, but beneath the surface, the truth was working its way through the cracks. Whispers traveled quickly, passed quietly from person to person until they reached ears that mattered. The image he had spent years perfecting began to fracture, and once those fractures appeared, there was no stopping the break. His confidence began to falter. The man who once spoke with authority in every room now chose his words carefully, watching for reactions he could no longer predict. Meetings that once ended in handshakes now ended in polite, thin smiles. Every interaction carried the faint edge of suspicion. The financial blows came next, not sudden bankruptcy, but an erosion. Investments that should have been solid began to underperform. Deals he was counting on fell apart at the last moment. Accounts that had always been comfortably full began to feel tighter. The car he loved was gone. The house that had been a symbol of his stability became a weight he could barely carry. Each loss chipped away at the certainty he once wore like armor, and all the while there was no confrontation, no outburst to give him the satisfaction of knowing exactly how much was known. That was the cruelest part. He was left to wonder. Every time the phone rang, every time someone looked at him for a moment too long, he questioned what they might have heard. The doubt was constant, gnawing at him from the inside. Even at home, there was no refuge. The warmth he had once taken for granted was gone. Conversations became brief, almost businesslike. The air between rooms felt heavier, charged with unspoken truths. He was surrounded by familiarity that no longer belonged to him. And still it kept going. The respect he once commanded in every circle was gone, replaced by quiet judgment. The man who had once been admired, even envied, was now spoken of in low voices, his name carrying a different weight entirely. People avoided meeting his eyes, not out of fear, but out of disappointment. It was in the small moments that the reality sank in for him, the hesitation in a handshake, the way an old friend's smile faltered, the silence that filled a room when he entered. He had built his life on control, on being the one who decided how the story would go. But control was gone now, slipping away piece by piece until there was nothing left for him to hold onto. There was no redemption waiting at the end of this. No grand gesture to make it right. Only the slow, unrelenting truth that every comfort, every ounce of respect, every piece of power he had once clung to was gone. And all that remained was the empty space where his empire had once stood, and the crushing weight of knowing he had destroyed it with his own hands. If this story left you breathless, remember it's only one of many. Each tale here will pull you deeper into the world where trust is shattered, secrets spill, and the guilty watch their worlds burn piece by piece. Subscribe now, hit the bell, and join us as we strip away the illusions and reveal the truth they fought to hide. Your next story is waiting.